our meditation leader is Barbara Hill.
Am I on? Hey, good morning.
Good morning.
Before I lead us in a meditation, I'd like to take this opportunity to publicly thank my friend Cara and her wonderful colleagues for the important work they've been doing to preserve the lake and its natural surroundings. Thank you. We're going to hear all about this. I now invite you to relax. Close your eyes if you care to, knowing that you are safe and supported by your chair. Take a few deep cleansing breaths. And each time you exhale, allow every muscle in your body to relax. Now let's imagine we are on our magnificent lake, either by the shore or gently floating in a boat. Across the lake are the majestic mountains with beautiful clouds above. As birds from distant places are drawn to this lake, people from all over the world come here to enjoy our near perfect weather, the natural beauty, the friendly people and culture. We are truly blessed. Here we can feel peaceful. We can feel renewed by the positive energy coming from the vortex of energy that has been felt by humans and other creatures for millennia. As we keep imagining we are on the beautiful lake, be still and listen to the birds. Enjoy Cara's talk on this beautiful day.
This week's presentation, Local Government's Efforts to Protect and Sustain Lake Chapala, and it's going to be presented by Cara Pratt. Have you ever wondered what local Mexican government entities are doing to protect our natural environment in the Lake Chapala region? Cara is going to talk to us about aquatic weed management, environmental education, efforts to combat and adapt to climate change, and the creation of natural protected areas surrounding Lake Chapala. Cara grew up in Kenosha, I think, Wisconsin. After graduating with degrees in environmental policy and international relations from Drake University in Des Moines, Iowa, she joined the United States Peace Corps in rural Paraguay. Cara spent 4 years promoting reforestation in Paraguay and now joins us as the United States Peace Corps response volunteer working in natural resources management with, and I don't know how to say this, Appermati? Intermunicipal Association for the Environmental Protection and Sustainable Development of Lake Chapala. Please welcome Cara.
Turn on. Variety of things before I start. 1 moment. So before I start, I want to recognize those of you in the audience who've served in the Peace Corps. I know that we're joined by Barbara Hill, my friend, and Jerry Schultz. If you could stand up, please. And also, has anyone else in the audience served in the United States Peace Corps? Okay, well, thank you both so much for your service. So before diving in, I need to provide a disclaimer. As a United States Peace Corps volunteer, what I share this morning does not represent the views of the United States government or the Mexican government. So I hope that doesn't disappoint anyone. That what I share today is only my own experience. So to give some background about the Peace Corps, it was created by executive order in 1961 by President John F. Kennedy. And since its 1961 inception, nearly 250,000 Americans have served in 141 countries. Peace Corps operates with 3 goals. Those are 1, to help the people of interested countries in meeting their need for trained men and women. 2, to help promote a better understanding of Americans on the part of people served. And 3, to help promote a better understanding of other peoples on the part of Americans. So, if you are listening closely, 2/3 of those Peace Corps goals are intercultural, and only 1/3 is technical international development work. So Peace Corps differs from other international development organizations in that volunteers do not have access to large funds. As Jerry and Barbara know, we live at the level of the people we serve. So that means that our Peace Corps stipends are often a little bit above or a little bit below local minimum wage. So typically, Peace Corps service is 27 months long, and I know my friends served for that full period for 2 years, three months of which are training in language, culture, and technical skills, and then you're spending 2 years living and working in a community. So when I first applied to Peace Corps, I was sent wherever the government told me to go. That was part of the agreement, and I know that that's the case for Barbara and for Jerry. That you sign up and say that you're willing to go wherever they send you. And just in the past 2 years, Peace Corps has changed that policy. So now you can apply to specific jobs in specific countries, which I think has encouraged a lot more people to apply. Peace Corps isn't an espionage organization. I know there's a lot of myths, and I know that a lot of us have heard that while we were serving. They've asked, "Are you a spy?" And my response is always, "Wouldn't my Spanish be so much better if I were a spy?" Also, Peace Corps is not religiously or politically affiliated, and it's not imposed by the U.S. government. That's a really important point. It's not an imposition on other countries. These other countries where we serve have to invite us. They have to ask for Peace Corps volunteers. And in addition to that, the organizations we work with have to request a volunteer. So, I'm actually finishing up my Peace Corps service next week. I have only 5 days left of Peace Corps service. So this talk came at the perfect time. This will mark my 48th month in service. So I know I mentioned 27 months is the typical path. I held on and stayed a little bit longer, both in Paraguay and here. So I have had 3 distinct experiences as a Peace Corps volunteer. I lived in an agricultural community in rural Paraguay in South America, where animals outnumbered people, and the indigenous language Guarani was spoken. I worked with a women's group on improving household food security with gardens and chickens. And I loved it so much that I stayed in Paraguay a 3rd year to work with the World Wildlife Fund in their headquarters in Asunción, Paraguay. So that was a vastly different experience. I was working in an office in sort of a more typical 9 to 5. And because I had that experience, I was recruited to work here as a Peace Corps response volunteer, which is a shorter period of time, in my case, 8 months, with Aipromales, and I've been here since September. So, thank you. I think I'm done, right? So, I think a lot of people are surprised when they hear that Peace Corps works in a place like Chapala, because it's so nice, right? But I think it's important to take into account that Peace Corps doesn't just work with people who you would consider to be impoverished in a traditional sense. Peace Corps works with a huge diversity of communities because there's a huge diversity of technical skills that volunteers have and specific needs that different communities have. So IPROMADES is an acronym that stands for the Intermunicipal Association for the Environmental Protection and Sustainable Development of Lake Chapala. Its territory consists of 16 municipalities in Jalisco that make up the Lake Chapala watershed. IPROMADES was created in 2009 as a grassroots initiative of 10 municipal governments. It has had a physical office for only 2 years. So before they used to work just out of trucks and out of coffee shops traveling around. There's a permanent staff now of 6 people and also a brigade of about 8 of hourly wage workers who work in the field. IPROMADES started with a solid waste focus. So their job was to fund the purchase of garbage trucks, to encourage trash separation, and also to make sure that landfills in these 16 municipalities were operating in a sustainable manner. Since 2009, IPROMADES has grown to incorporate other areas that I will discuss, including aquatic weed management, the creation of natural protected areas, adaptation and mitigation of climate change, and environmental education. IPROMADES receives money from each of the 16 municipalities it serves, in addition to the Jalisco state government. So while IPROMADES is not a government institution, all of the money it currently receives is from government. It can, however, receive private and international funds if anyone is interested in donating. In the near future, IPROMADES hopes to regionalize. That's the next step of the organization. So when you hear 16 municipalities, you might think, that's way too big of a territory for one organization. So they're breaking it into 4 different regions, and each region will have a promoter, an environmental promoter, who operates in that region. So if anyone knows of someone looking for a job in the future, those are jobs that will be available. Some challenges IPROMADES faces include its small size and substantial workload. So I mentioned there are only 6 permanent staff, and there are many millions of pesos that need to be sort of arranged and distributed to other entities, and it is a huge amount of work for 6 people. Also, as an intermunicipal entity, politics also has a huge role in how the organization functions. So IPROMADES is affected by political changes and also has to be flexible in working with a huge array of political parties represented by each of these municipalities. So the reason I was recruited for this position in the first place, this Peace Corps response position, is because of a public-private partnership that exists between tech giant IBM and Peace Corps. So my response position is the 3rd in a series of pilots in which a Peace Corps response volunteer leads a consultation, a month-long consultation with IBM professionals from across the world. So in October, at IPROMADES, we housed 5 consultants from IBM from Austria, India, and the United States in order to address one specific problem, which is finding alternative economic uses for extracted aquatic weeds. So finding something to do with all of the green floating stuff that you see in the lake so that it's not just a waste product. And those of you who have been in the area for some time know that these floating weeds are a huge problem in this part of the country and also all over the world where freezing doesn't stop these weeds from spreading. So rumor has it, water hyacinth, which is sort of the main aquatic weed in the area, which has the purple flower, was brought to this area by Porfirio Diaz's wife, who loved the way it looked. We're not sure if it's true, but that's what people tell us. The plant is actually native to Brazil, and it has prolifically spread across the whole world, limited, as I mentioned before, only by freezing temperatures. The other invasive, non-native, floating aquatic weed here is called water lettuce, or lechuguilla. And so that's another weed that you'll see with the luteum floating along the lake, and it does just look like lettuce floating in the water. So these plants are not only an eyesore and a complication for navigation and fishing, but their presence further contributes to the eutrophication of the lake. These floating weeds thrive here because the lake is so nutrient dense. And I don't mean nutrients in a good way. I mean nutrients that come from agricultural runoff, from industry upstream. And an easy way to think about this is that the fertilizer used in agriculture that helps our plants and our food grow robustly flows into water sources and also helps these aquatic plants grow and thrive. So while they're invasive, they aren't all bad. We don't want to think of these weeds as evil. They provide an ecosystem service by absorbing heavy metals in the water. However, as you can imagine, if that plant is not extracted from the water, then that ecosystem service is negligible. So this plant can flow through the lake, absorbing heavy metals, and then it needs to be removed. Otherwise, the plant will decay, and the heavy metals return to the lake, and there's really no benefit that's provided. So our goal is not necessarily eradication of these non-native invasive weeds. It is management so that we can reach their optimum ecosystem service while also not contributing to the contamination of the water or of however we use these weeds in an alternate way once we extract them. So we don't want them to ever cover more than 3% of the surface area of Lake Chapala, and that's our goal in maintaining that level. So, IBM consultants and Ipromale staff spent 1 month researching this huge global problem and its local context. And upon completing their corporate service core consultancy, IBM recommended 4 uses for these extracted water weeds. They are compost, making artisan handicrafts, making briquettes as an alternative to firewood, or taking advantage of the decay of weeds to create biogas. So more recently, we've been informed by a chemist at the University of Guadalajara that heavy metal content of the water hyacinth, Lidio aquatico, is not high enough to cause concern for use in compost or for use in animal feed, which is another alternate use that could potentially be utilized. So many of you have seen of or heard this machinery that's been working on the shores of the lake to extract these weeds. And that is part of a program called Chapala with Ipromales. This is an effort funded by the Ipromales organization, therefore funded by municipal organizations and Jalisco state government. And it includes different machines such as a conveyor belt, what's called a weed-oo, which is a specialized yellow boat that has an arm for taking out these aquatic weeds. Also, we have a tractor and a trailer. So this sort of brigade of machines works in conjunction to remove the weeds from the water. You might have seen them near the Chapala Malecon. They worked there for probably a solid month. We've worked in Isla Huacan and are currently operating in Juanacatlan near El Salto. So we've extracted, at Chapala specifically, the equivalent of 7.5 acres of aquatic weeds. And by the end of this year, Ipromales hopes to replicate this Chapala Limpio brigade to have two brigades working around the lake. And you might wonder why we work in El Salto, in Juanacatlan, why we work in Isla Huacan. And it's important to think of this as an entire ecosystem. So when we work in adjacent water bodies or upstream, then we're really affecting the weed content in Lake Chapala. So everything is connected, and there's also obviously a lot of political pressure to have these machines in certain municipalities, wherever the political will is strongest, to be able to show the constituents that we're cleaning up the aquatic weeds in our area. In addition to Chapala Limpio, a big part of Abromales is the creation of natural protected areas, namely the mountainous ring surrounding Lake Chapala known as Sierras Lago de Chapala. Sierras Lago de Chapala includes one existing protected area. Did you all know that you live in really close proximity to a protected area? It's this area right behind us. So you can tell people back home that you live between a protected area and the largest lake in Mexico. And this area is called Cerro Viejo Chupinaya Los Sabinos. It's been a protected area for 2 years. And in addition to Cerro Viejo, we're hoping to establish 5 protected areas around this sort of green ring of the lake, totaling nearly 250,000 acres. So, Cerro Viejo, as I mentioned, spans from Jocotepec to Chapala. And it's recognized at a state level. The technical protection is a hydrologic state protected area. The equivalent would be something like a state park or a state forest. But there's a really important distinction here in Mexico, and that's that it has nothing to do with land tenure. So in the process of protecting land, ownership doesn't change. The owners of the land now, which are ejidos, communally owned land, and indigenous communities, maintain that ownership of the land through the process of creating protected areas. So our goal is not only to improve conservation work in the region, but also work with these communities, with these ejidos and indigenous communities to support economic development in the region. The process of creating a protected area involves so many community meetings. First, we have to meet with municipal government to make sure that they're on board and that they'll support us. And then we meet with each ejido and each indigenous community to make sure that the process is transparent and that really it comes from them. The interest is authentic and that it's something that they want for their families. So as you can imagine, this is a complicated process, particularly explaining that the ownership doesn't change because, as you can all imagine, there's a fear in a lot of people that there will be sort of an external agent that comes in and takes people's land. That's happened so much in history, but that is certainly not the case with what we're promoting, and so communicating that to people is often a challenge that we face. So in addition to being transparent, it's extremely participative. There has to be community consensus, and once that consensus is reached, we move to the mapping process. And so we determine the boundaries of where these protected areas will be. We determine the zoning, which has to do mostly with the people who own the land and where they identify the richest forest to be. Where they say, we want to plant more trees here. Or where they say, we want to grow crops here but in a sustainable way. And we want a trail here to encourage ecotourism. So that process takes about a year in our experience. And we're currently in the middle of creating 2 of those 5 that I mentioned earlier. They're called Sierra Condiro Canales and Cerro San Miguel Chiquitillo. This one area that I mentioned that already exists behind us, Cerro Viejo Chupinaya Los Sabinos, now qualifies for grant-funded projects. So because it's under protected status, now it can receive money from the state government to do some of those projects that I mentioned. So they can plant trees or encourage ecotourism. And what they've done so far is equip a firefighting brigade, create fire breaks in their forests, and also build trails and invest in signage so that tourists can recognize where they're walking and where they'll end up and how long it will take. And in the future, we do hope to encourage sustainable agriculture and ecotourism in this area as well. So in addition to Chapala Limpio that I mentioned, and Sierras Lago de Chapala, Abromales, like most environmental organizations, is in some way invested in helping to combat climate change. So that work is really more recent in the case of Abromales and involves mostly data collection. So right now there are consultants who work in understanding the emissions of each of these 16 municipalities. and then they're communicating that emissions data to these municipalities to understand where they can make improvements to reduce their emissions. Hopefully in the next few years, that sort of work will be more prominent in Ipermalis. Besides that, we have funded the creation of a free mobile application that I hope you will all download. It's called Ajijic Chapala. It is a bird identifying app, and it provides information on bird species in the region, including pictures, information about distribution, habitat, and bird calls to facilitate your identifying different birds around here. And also I want to publicly thank John Keeling for his work on that application, and it will soon be available, thanks to him, in English in addition to its original Spanish. Thank you. So, in addition to John's incredible work with that app, Ipermalis has also worked with both of the Keelings, John and Rosemary, to build our own capacity in bird watching, which is something that no one on our staff knew a whole lot about, but we recognize that it's important, particularly in this immigrant community. It seems to be a popular activity, and also can be really popular with young people. That was a joke. Oh, so after a long fight, Ipermalis finally has 6 sets of binoculars, and so we can start to work with sort of a younger generation to encourage bird watching, hopefully in conjunction with the active retired community that already is really experts in the area. In addition to that, you may have seen Fernanda and I here at LCS and the Children's Art Program. We have helped celebrate different environmental holidays with activities related to migratory birds, wetlands ecosystems, the water cycle, and using nature to make art. So we're so grateful of having this space here that already exists so that we can come in and really promote environmental education. So, as I mentioned before, I've spent 4 years now as a Peace Corps volunteer, and I've learned quite a lot. When I first started, I was 22 and a starry-eyed optimist, as I think a lot of Peace Corps volunteers are. And now, while I'm still optimistic, I have a much more realistic understanding of the impact one person can have working against the current. As a Peace Corps volunteer, you need patience and you need flexibility. That's what they tell us constantly whenever we have an issue. Be more patient, be more flexible. So I've learned that in international development, if you find an option that's the easiest option, it's probably wrong, because it shouldn't be easy. For us, coming from our culture and with our training as Peace Corps volunteers, it might be easy for us to lead and to do everything ourselves, or to find money to solve a problem. But if our goal truly is sustainability, we have to teach, model behavior, and plant seeds in others so that they lead and they take ownership. It's not about the physical work that we accomplish. It's about the impact we can have years into the future by building confidence and building capacity to eventually change behavior. It's about the people we work with. Since I mentioned money, the most crucial investment, if any of you are thinking of investing, is in education. The financial barrier to quality education is a universal problem. If you want to make a difference and do something to combat inequality using your own financial privilege, I hope you consider paying for someone to go to school, whether it's your own kids or your grandkids or anyone you happen to know. And I hope that you pay for a girl to go to school, because women are the future, particularly in developing countries. And we as women can't always rely on men to make room for us, because some of them won't. So we have to take the space when we see it and occupy it. So I want to tell a story now that I think is funny. Hopefully you'll think it's funny too. When I was finishing on my service in Paraguay, I heard that my boss had been sort of talking about me in this negative way. She was probably sick of me after 3 years, sick of my sort of assertive attitude, and she said to this friend of mine, "I think you're spending too much time with Cara because I see that her strong personality is rubbing off on you." And even though it was meant in a negative way, it was a little shady, I thought, that's the best compliment I've ever received. I've ruffled feathers and taken opportunities to point out sexism in machista workplaces, which is hard to do in a diplomatic way, and I hope that I've done it in a way that teaches people instead of criticizes. So I wanted to mention that all of the 16 municipal presidents where we work are men. And the conservation sector in Mexico is so male-dominated. The landowners we work with are exclusively male. But when Ajijic goes into the field and holds meetings about the future of conservation, they see an exuberant, brilliant 31-year-old with a master's degree who is my colleague, Fernanda. The only woman in the room, almost always, and the youngest, except for me. So, I thought I could get through that. We went and got some donuts earlier, and I really thought I could do it without crying. But I'm so happy to be joined today by her, because those of you who work in jobs like this know that it's the people. It's not the physical work, it's the people you work with. And I hope my personality rubbed off on you too. Okay. Whew. Thank you so much. I'll take questions now and stop weeping, hopefully.
Lovely. So the way we do questions here is you raise your hand, just like we did when we introduced people. Mic will be brought to you. You can stand up. We really prefer questions over commentary because we want to learn as much as we can from Cara. So please do it that way. If you ramble on, I might interrupt you. That's all I can say. Just giving you a heads up, I'm going to be rude.
What is your organization doing about the dumping of the heavy metals, the real core of the problem in the lake?
That's a great question. I would say the answer is at this point, not a lot. Because as you can imagine, that is really a political issue, just immensely difficult to address. So we try to provide as much information as possible about water quality when we have studies available, but pointing the finger at a specific organization.
Kleenex? She needs a Kleenex.
Nah, come on.
Oh no, she has a Kleenex. Never mind.
Thanks. Pointing the finger at a specific industry would be a nightmare for us. It would be our undoing. So there's a lot of dancing around, honestly. And I think that's something for higher up people to really tackle, for state entities and people upstream. And I hope that one day they have the courage to do it. But understanding how politics in Mexico work, I think it's delicate. It's hard to do that. Thank you.
Here in the back.
My name's Martha, and I live right on this beautiful lake. And I love to sit there and watch the birds and the cattails, and one day I walked out and they're all gone. And I wondered if you could explain to me why they took out all of them.
I was worried someone would ask me that. So there's an aquatic weed that I didn't mention that we do sometimes remove, and that's called tule, which are the cattails that you mentioned. And that is not necessarily invasive, but politicians don't like to see it sort of blocking their view. And also there are a lot of people who survive off of fishing and getting out to where the fishing areas need, where they need to fish is difficult when there's so many cattails. So it's a matter of managing that area, but that's a valid concern, and I hope that people feel confident to voice those concerns to our organization after I leave.
My name is Susanna, and thank you, Cara. Wonderful presentation. Really, really great. What I'd like to know is, for those of us who live here and want in some way to be involved as opposed to giving money, is there a way that we can tap in?
Absolutely. I think that Icramales searches for people with certain specific skills. I know that we need to strengthen our work in environmental education, particularly because Fernanda works in the creation of those protected areas that I mentioned. So that's a huge undertaking. And as soon as I'm gone, the environmental education piece will be difficult to maintain. In addition to that, people who are skilled in communications, we have a social media page that my other colleague who is here, Javier Zamora, you could wave. He helps run, but also, like Fernanda, he has a million other things to do. So communications, environmental education, the support of the Keelings in birding has been excellent, and I hope that they're interested in taking some young Mexicans under their wing to also help them learn the beauty of birding. Did you have something else to add?
I just to follow up on that, wondering then that means that in volunteers Spanish to do translation. That a volunteer Spanish in order to do or assist in translation has to be excellent. You're talking about translation to Spanish as opposed to English, right?
I think our social media could probably be in both English and Spanish. There are two members of our staff who do speak English fluently, Fernanda and Gabriel, who is the director. So I think depending on what you were doing specifically, speaking English would be fine.
Hi, Cara. Thank you very much for your passion and your talk. Mostly your passion. I can see that you will be an asset wherever you go in life. Except for people who are sort of entrenched. My question is, I heard quite a few years ago that one of the uses for the hyacinth was as cattle feed. Is that correct or not?
Yes. So part of this research that IBM did when they were working with us was to create a list of 10 different alternate uses. And then we sort of ranked them in terms of how successful they could be in the region. And since this is a global problem, there were studies from all over the world about feeding water hyacinths to a bunch of different animals. And what I got out of these studies and what IBM learned from them is that it's a decent animal food if there's nothing else available. So cows particularly will eat it if there's no other option, but they lose weight when they eat it. So that's not really an ideal situation. Right here.
Hi, it's my observation that when water flows over the dams, once it's that full, that's when the water hyacinth shows up in the lake. So do you try to emphasize getting rid of it at that end?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So that's our goal in having this second brigade, is to really attack it at its source, which is upstream, rivers. So, yes.
Okay. Second quick question. Are you coordinating with Luis Enrique Ramos Bostillo on the pathways and the sign markings. He has a big organization trying to make it big anyway. He spoke here at Open Circle about their work on the pathways up into the mountains and the signage. Are you aware of him?
I'm not aware. Are you aware, Javier?
It would be good if you could.
Could you repeat the name of that person?
Luis. Yeah, Luis Enrique Bustillo Ramos.
Oh, I do know him. Yeah, well, the most important thing is that, yes, my colleagues know him better than I do. Yeah.
Hi, Cara. Thank you again for sharing. Quick question. Any 10, 30-year studies on world climate change and influence on lake levels?
I'm looking at my colleague, Javier, about climate change. Si quieres decirlo en sí, y lo traduzco. En inglés. So Javier works in the climate change portion of Hydromales. Si tiene algo que ver con el cambio de lagos.
Sí, se ha manejado algunos estudios ya en el sentido de que el aumento o el incremento de las temperaturas. Hay un estudio de la Universidad Autónoma de México que dice que si continuara esto en 20 o 30 años podría ser una zona semiárida como lo es la laguna de Sayula.
So if any of you have heard of the Sayula Lagoon, which is a lagoon that has dried up, there have been studies at the University of Guadalajara that if trends continue with certain river levels that contribute to lake levels, then there's a risk that Lake Chapala's levels could continue to decrease. But that's one study. There are other studies that I've heard of that support its maintaining its lake levels.
I was curious what you're going to do with your 4 years of wonderful experience. What's next for you? Because there is a Return Peace Corps volunteers group, and you know we occasionally meet and all. But your future is still there, and you've had this wonderful experience. What's next for you?
Good question. So I'll be starting my master's degree in public administration at Cornell University in August. And Barbara is telling me that after that I should share with you that I really hope to run for office one day.
In the back and the gazebo.
I wonder if you've been in communication with Dr. Todd Stong.
I have. I was at his talk here, and also we met at a coffee shop and had an exchange of information. And he has so much important experience here, particularly with water quality and working in a lot of the indigenous communities where we hope to work in the future. So we hope to continue to work with him and find ways where our environmental interests can match with his economic interests.
Again in the gazebo? Yes.
Yeah, just a question. What is your opinion of the quality of the lake? Because many people are upset or afraid to even go into the lake.
I don't think people should be afraid of going into the lake. In my experience, kayaking with the excellent Chapala Kayaking Club, once you get out into the more towards the middle of the lake, it's just beautiful. And something that I think people who don't have experience with eutrophic lakes, which is a type of lake that's nutrient rich and has a lot more green growth around it, is that once you get towards the middle, it looks more pleasant to us who are not as familiar with that type of lake. So we might be from, what is it, Ola, the opposite of eutrophic, Ola, who knows. But there's another type of lake where there is less oxygen available, so those are sort of mountainous lakes, more lakes that you would see where I come from in the upper Midwest. And so to us, from our worldview, those look cleaner because they don't have as much greenery, but that's not necessarily the case at all. I mean, if you go to a beach in Chicago, I wouldn't want to swim there compared to here.
Where are we now? We have a question right here.
I'd like to know how to contact or communicate with your organization so that, you know, if there's ways that we can volunteer or something like that. I don't know how to contact you.
Okay, so we, on Facebook, we are Promades Lago de Chapala. So you can come up afterwards and we can write that down for you or help you find it on your phones. Also, we're on Twitter, Promades. You can email us at ipromades@gmail.com. And again, I'll write all this down. Or I think it's in, I think the word Promades is in the release.
On our website?
Yeah.
There are some people here who are spelling challenged. Could you just spell that out so that we could at least hear the letters?
I can try. So it's AIPROMADES.
Are you sure?
Promades. But please come up after and we can write it down and make sure that you've got it. And I heard someone else ask earlier also where the office is. The office is in Chapala on a street called Las Redes. It is about 3 blocks from the old train station.
How are we? Anybody else have a question in the back?
Hi. Can you tell us what's going to happen with the ideas that you came up with IBM? Is someone going to follow up with that?
Yes. This, just to clarify, specifically the work of IBM here or the partnership generally with Peace Corps and IBM?
The one that where you looked at the way, what you do with the weeds around the world. Because all those things sound very, they could happen here easily as a business.
Right. So we're hoping to compost by the end of the year, and we're also going to be having workshops with the municipalities where we work to learn and teach how to make handicrafts out of these extracted weeds. Also to understand who we can collaborate with to investigate in more detail the possibility of creating biogas. There are some universities that exist that are doing similar research, and they have access to far more funds for sort of experimenting and investigation, and obviously the technical skills required to do that. So we're hoping to work with the University of Guadalajara in the future for that specifically.
Is the Lirio here different than the ones that you, like, out of Indonesia, you know, where they're making the furniture? I mean, that's what people say. The rumor's been that they're going to be making furniture here out of the Lirio. Is that rumor?
I haven't heard that rumor, strangely.
Yeah.
But the source of that rumor should get in contact with us. And
because there's a bunch of furniture that's brought in from Indonesia that's up on the Cara Pratt towards Chapala, and they sell it, and it is made from Lirio.
Really?
Yeah, but I don't know how many varieties or whatever, but they're making fabulous woven furniture.
My colleagues seem intrigued, so if anyone has any more information about that, they're wide-eyed.
The last question right
Okay,
now.
just a quick question. Will there be another Peace Corps volunteer coming to this area?
Will there be another Peace Corps volunteer coming to the area was the question. And that depends on the host country organization requesting one. So like I said before, Peace Corps does not impose volunteers on anyone. They have to be formally requested. So IPROMADES is working with CONAFOR, which is the national forestry entity. And through CONAFOR, they can request a Peace Corps volunteer either through response, so a short-term position, or a full-length 27-month position. And I think that they want to. Yeah.
You didn't burn them out. You actually.
I hope not. I'm a little high maintenance sometimes. With good intentions.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.